Well, looks like no one showed up for the presentation on the Douche India Company. Guess I can leave then.
Who's the East India Company?
You! Shut up! Sit down! Put that teacup down! It's time for a short guide to the East India Company. To begin, there's two groups, the British and the Dutch India Companies. The British India Company was founded December 31st, 1600 and was dissolved in 1874, while the counterpart stole their idea and founded 2 years later, 1602, and was dissolved in 1874. One late December, a group of old rich white dudes asked the Crown of England to give them complete monopoly rights on India. They would get total control on trade with India and would claim lands for the British Empire. British chumps who wanted to get rich quick would sail the ocean blue to the bottom of South India. They'd set up shop, make nice with the locals, and become England's primary resource for goodies from the East. What they didn't account for was the fact that it took 2 years in between each trip between England and India at minimum and would be a major risk for all involved. In the meantime, there were rumors of Christians in the East interesting those of the Portuguese government controlling the Dutch Republic. They sent the Dutch India Company to the Far East, searching areas of Asia the British wouldn't reach until much later. Their primary goal? Unite the globe with Christianity from East and West. Because the missionaries were so aggressive, they scared the countries of Japan and China so bad they closed their ports and entered isolationism. This made trade with the Far East nations near impossible at the time. As time in India progressed, the merchants grew into total chads. They adopted many of India's customs, including their clothing and the practice of polygamy. The lowest-ranking merchants even lived like kings. Then, 1707, the Mughal Empire of India began dying out, and...
Wait a minute, what about...
Shut up, nerd! These chads had no hiring restrictions, would just hire their friends and family, furthering the gap of class structure. So at the time, if you wanted to make it good, you had to get good with the merchants. 1756 to 1763, colonization was the game. France and Spain were enemy number one to the East India Company. After the 7 Years' War, the British East India Company became the primary resource for all things from the Orient, including tea, herbs, spices, porcelain, textiles, and several other objects of pleasure. They had total control over all of India. As the new overlords of India, the East India Company no longer cared about what happened to the people that lived there. The English crown would then send women that they had deemed of low value to the country over to India, along with missionaries, and would force people of India to conform to their culture. Although the merchants at the time had wanted to get along with the locals, many English women who were living within India refused to adopt Indian customs. This, along with the English church insisting that the crown allow them to send missionaries over to India and convert the locals over to Christianity. After this, the East India Company decided that over time they would build their own standing army. It would consist of members from India and other parts of the Asia colonies. The army, consisting of members suffering acculturation, grew to dislike their English generals, leading to mutiny and capital punishment. Do you know what happens when you give a monopolist company control over a country? They will let the people starve, eat each other, and will seek only profit. After total control over India, the company slowly began to stop the growth of important crops for food and started only producing cash crops. Among these crops was the opium poppy, the key ingredient in the drug of opium. Opium is a highly addictive substance. With some medical uses, opium has been used to relieve pain and experience immense pleasure.
Why is that part important?
As the 19th century began, the company began to lose many of its contracts over monopolization of Asia and its products. Up until the mid-19th century, the East India Company had struggled with trade with China. At this time, China believed themselves to have reached perfection. They had no need to trade with the outside. China wanted nothing but had everything. The company would have been completely within their hands. Now back to opium. Before the company, China had used it in the past, mostly for medical purposes. As time would go on for them, they began to use it for more recreational purposes for the high class. Eventually, the Manchu dynasty of China would put a loose ban on the substance. China only allowed one port to be open for trade, known as the port city of Canton. The East India Company would have eventually noticed the Chinese people's desire for opium. Like a drug dealer does, The East India Company slung their drugs right and got the peoples of China addicted to their opium. Over time, the company smuggled it in and got more and more people addicted. Those addicted, up to 25%, no longer contributed to Chinese society, becoming zombie-like. The Manchu Emperor would then catch on to this, enforcing a stronger ban on the substance, and eventually getting aggressive with the company itself. They attacked and destroyed shipments of opium. The East India Company got all fussy, tattled to Mama England, and created the First Opium War. These wars reigned from 1842 until 1859. With the efforts of England and France, Manchu China was open to trade for most all European countries and established Hong Kong as an exclusive territory of the British Empire. Don't worry about the rest of the details about the Opium Wars. Those aren't really important right now. 20 or so years later, the East India Company was dissolved by Queen Victoria of England. By accounts of corruption, the English crown was then left to clean up the mess left behind by the company. Okay, so what they got was... When the company had first established itself as a monopoly in India, they had made arrangements with the Mughal Empire of India at the time that they would trade them silver and gold bullions in exchange to let them set up their forts, take resources, and mingle with the people there. Aside from acculturalizing them, some of the other Asian countries would trade their objects not for riches, but for Western technology, compasses, clocks, and most importantly, guns. To these other nations, these objects themselves were enough to represent wealth and status. Like in the West we fantasize about the East also kept fantasies of the West. The East held deep curiosity about the West, and from prior encounters during the Dutch and at the times of Marco Polo, they developed their curiosities. When re-interacting with them, they were quick to mass-produce woodblock prints and were quick to copy Western technology and art styles. While both the East and the West viewed each other as barbarous creatures, with lack of understanding for each other at the same time, these encounters have given towards most of the East's modern practices today.
I'm okay. What about...
Shut up! And now you know about the East India Company. You're welcome.